It's Sunday, April 12, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a lawyer, public defender, and author. Her book on the criminal court system and smarter public safety solutions, called The Price of Mercy, is published now and is available in all good bookshops. Emily Galvin Almanza, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Emily, I want to tap into your kind of legal expertise as we kind of sit in the midst of a temporary ceasefire, although at the time we're recording this, the 2-week ceasefire is supposedly holding, but it's extremely tenuous between the US, Iran, you have Israel and Lebanon. I mean, we know that it's chaotic and we know that it's a mess, but really the issue I wanted to get into is this phrase war crimes that has been bandied around by many, not just, people over the dinner table, but certainly, legislators as well, who are kind of making this point. And we've seen from Democrats trying to force a war powers resolution to try and halt this war. Donald Trump, when asked recently if he was bothered by the fact that this illegal war and certainly the attack on civilian infrastructure specifically was tantamount to a war crime under international law, he said, "I don't care about that." How much of a problem is that, not just in him saying he doesn't care about it, but any president of the United States publicly denying that they care nothing for international law at a time like this?
Well, it brings to mind what happens when you create a world with no accountability. We have had the luxury of, for a long time, living in a world with no accountability and yet a certain adherence to public mores or the appearance thereof. Now, I'm not saying the U.S. has never committed war crimes. The U.S. has engaged in a lot of acts which many people would argue are internationally illegal. Some known, some clandestine. So I'm certainly not taking the position that the United States has a history of perfect moral comportment on the global stage. What I am saying, though, is that we've never before had an administration that was willing to blatantly flaunt this idea that we are not a party to the norms of the global community, that we are somehow above or not beholden to international law. Now, we are not a party to the International Criminal Court. That does not mean that the United States can commit war crimes, can contravene the Geneva Convention, can engage in, I think one big concern that was raised this week because of a series of completely unhinged public messages from our president was their genocidal intent. Messages threatening to wipe an entire civilization that's 10 times older than the United States, out of existence. Now, to be clear, genocide, attempts to commit genocide, meaning attempts to wipe out a people, are globally illegal. But also just, there's smaller versions of the illegal intent of our administration. We see it a little bit in its sort of nascent form in our military attacks on civilians in South America. A very questionable ouster of a South American leader, which our administration portrayed as if it were like the execution of a domestic federal court warrant, but executed very far away, which then the president contravened by describing that action in the most military possible terms. And now we have, threats, not just genocidal threats, but also, threats to attack vital civilian infrastructure like desalination plants or power plants, attacks that are deliberately targeting non-combatants, targeting civilians, are also illegal. Now, the real question, though, is who holds these people accountable? I tweeted the other day that if I knew anyone in the chain of command right now who had a relevant role to play in the military strategy that would unfold in coming days, I would be urging them as a criminal defense attorney to consult with counsel, to consult with personal counsel, to literally find a lawyer and say, if I am asked to do X or Y, should I do it? The reason being The law does not allow a defense as sort of just following orders defense. This Nuremberg defense, we don't recognize that in the law. So if somebody in the military is given an illegal order and carries it out, they are as criminally responsible as the higher up person whose position of power and privilege may shield them from prosecution. I think it's really important that we reflect as a people too on like how we have shielded powerful actors from prosecution. Like in my field in the criminal courts, I can tell you about, there was a study of prosecutors in California, all of whom had engaged in misconduct. So we're looking just at a sample of prosecutors who have done something really, really wrong. 0.8% of them were ever disciplined. Now, I mention this because this is the root of how we grow government that acts this way. When you have in the criminal courts a situation where law enforcement actors, prosecutors, powerful attorneys, are not held accountable ever. They can break the rules and see no consequences. The impunity that ultimately rises to the highest level of our government stems from that culture of free passes for the powerful, which is why I say it's probably the soldier who carries out illegal orders who is more likely to be held accountable than the leaders who place those orders, unless and until we develop our own robust domestic mechanism for holding government leaders accountable, which so far we've been on the opposite path.
More than 100 international law experts signed an open letter warning that these military strikes on Iran violate international law and could amount to war crimes. The fact that it's kind of outside law experts who are not associated with the US government that are having to call this out suggests to me that Trump is in his own lane. And in fact, when Mark Kelly, for example, got up and made that video with a bunch of other senators and congresspeople saying exactly what you just described, that talking directly to the military and saying you do not have to respond to illegal orders from your superiors. Who was the person to call that out? It was Trump and Trump's henchmen, and claimed that, and had them investigated for that. Is that not an admission that the fascist is very much in the White House?
Well, this administration has made no bones about its overt desire to have people in place who personally serve Trump rather than people in place who serve justice or who serve the laws of our nation. We had our attorney general testifying in front of Congress being asked about major serious allegations of government ties to one of the worst pedophilia cases like in our nation's history that anyone's ever uncovered, right? And she started screaming that the Dow was over 50,000. Like we have a series of people who have been personally, representing the president, attaining positions of power in government. I'm going to remind people once again, the Department of Justice is not the personal legal apparatus to the president.
Well, it wasn't. It is now, but it wasn't. And so isn't this something we also need to deal with in the present?
There are people in the Department of Justice now who are acting as personal counsel to the president. That does not mean that the institution of the Department of Justice has changed its nature. It just means that it's being run by people who aren't doing the job that they're supposed to do. They are doing something else, something that many people would probably term corrupt.
How do career prosecutors handle that? Because they're the ones who are having to navigate that line.
Very carefully. I mean, there are people who have left their positions because they weren't able to they felt that they were not able to fulfill their ethical duty to do justice. I should remind listeners that prosecutors have a unique ethical obligation. This is why it's so important to differentiate between Trump's personal lawyers and our, lawyers for the people. Because prosecutors have a unique ethical obligation, which is not to serve a client, but rather to do justice. The Department of Justice does not represent the president. It represents the people of the United States of America. It is supposed to hold the president accountable, should it need to. So there are lawyers within the Department of Justice who have said, under these circumstances, I cannot fulfill my ethical duties. I cannot seek justice when I am supposed to seek, just say retributive prosecutions on behalf of people in power. So Part of the problem is the creation of an environment in which lawyers who still want to do the right thing cannot stay. But that does not mean that the Department of Justice is itself no longer an institution that could return. I mean, literally, we always mistake the court system as being like a real thing that you could touch or hold or change or modulate. It's just people. It's made out of people. It's people in rooms. So like right now, the Justice Department is filled with people who would like to or who are comfortable with pursuing the personal goals of the president. That could easily change. Even, after the midterms, there's a likelihood that the quantity of accountability and culture change that could be brought from a House and Senate changing hands could have a very meaningful impact, not just on the presidency, but on all of the executive branch institutions that surround it.
Provided people come out and vote for Democrats. We should probably add that sentence to all of these issues.
Senate should flip, which obviously not just if people come out and vote, but I predict if people put up with a whole lot of stuff, trying to get in their way. If people, for example, double check that they are registered a couple months before the election, if people check that their neighbors are still registered, if they make a plan for very, very long lines at the polls, if they utilize mail-in voting, if that's still allowable in their state, if they recognize that there have been changes to the rules surrounding mail-in voting so that you have to mail your ballot way earlier to make sure that it gets there before election day. I mean, if people can overcome, let me just say this. This week, there were a lot of news items about the draft, about a return to the draft in which young men of the now expanded draft age, so men from 18 up into their 40s, will be automatically registered for the draft, which means our government knows who's a citizen, knows who's eligible, knows where they are, knows their names, and can just put them on a list, which means that if we wanted to, we could just automatically register people to vote too when they turn 18. But our government right now has no interest in free access to the polls. They want to restrict and suppress the vote. And there's just another demonstration of it in the way they're handling the draft.
Let's go back to the DOJ for a second, because the interim AG is Todd Blanche, who was the deputy to Pam Bondi. And he was also the personal defense attorney for Donald Trump during all of his troubles prior to getting elected. Todd Blanche was asked kind of outright in his first press conference a couple of days ago about this very thing that you say about, what does the DOJ do? Like, who does it represent? And he changed the rules of the game. He basically came out and said that it is absolutely fair for us to fight on behalf of the president. And if the president wants people prosecuted or investigated, I should say, then that's what we're going to do. He is well within his rights to ask us to do that. Completely at odds with what you described as how the DOJ is supposed to operate. So they're not even trying to hide it anymore, Emily. Certainly with Todd Blanche in charge. He has muscle memory from being Trump's personal lawyer, and that is going to continue during this interim period, which could go longer, as he runs the Department of Justice.
So I'm going to push back on the muscle memory thing. I mean, here's an individual who is willing to stand up and declare as a legitimate purpose for our Department of Justice something that is completely illegitimate and contravenes the very structure of a democratic government. Little d, democratic. Right. Free and just government. That's not because he was Trump's lawyer. That's because he's a person who is willing to sell out the American people instead, in service of the personal behest of the president. I think that there are lots. The reason I'm pushing back on this is there are lots of people who have done defense work who would not set aside the ethical obligations of the Department of Justice. So I don't think it's a professional background thing. I think that our president has a history of seeking to surround himself with people who have a great deal of personal loyalty to him, who are willing to go extraordinarily far in service of that loyalty, farther than we have seen. I mean, as you point out, like statements of that nature completely contravene the role of the office. It takes a very particular level of loyalty to overtly name an intent that a lot of people would probably consider to be a corruption of the office. I don't think that's because of his past job. I think that's because of who he is.
Could I push back on you referring to a democratic government? Because I'm not convinced that that is what we have right now.
Oh,
and
no.
Whilst it,
be clear,
whilst
no.
it might be... Well, whilst it might be temporary, this is a blip, right? That we are under the kibosh of a tin pot dictatorship, or a dollar store dictator, as I like to describe him. That is what's happening. I mean, and so, to have hope in the fact that it will swing back to its default position of having a kind of a democratic system where people do feel a sense of moral duty to do the right thing, even to a written or unwritten code. We hope that that is in America's future, but that is not America's present. So
I think it's a little worse than that, actually.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah, we are having a moment that I hope and pray is temporary. I think we'd all be so thrilled to return to something boring.
Right.
But that doesn't actually address the other problem we have, which is that there are many, many ways in which leaders of all sorts fail to accurately represent the wishes and the views of their constituents. John Fetterman going off the rails in Pennsylvania and having, absolutely turned his back on the values on which he ran and for which people voted, and Pennsylvania having no recall mechanism for a senator. So there's just nothing the people of Pennsylvania can do about the fact that they are currently represented by someone who's not representing them. I think, we see other things. This week, Democrats failed to come to an agreement on a renunciation of AIPAC. At this moment in America, like 80% of Democrats would like their party to renounce AIPAC. And the party won't do it. And I'm not saying that like Democrats are the baddies, because I don't think that they are. I think that they're much closer to representing the actual will of their constituents than Republicans who have continually chosen policies which enrich billionaires and hurt the people who vote for them. But I am saying that when you look at Mayor Mamdani in New York, okay, you see him doing stuff that people actually want and care about. You see him like taking 311 calls and filling potholes and creating a 2K.
Shoveling snow.
Yeah. And he just created a 2K daycare program for 2-year-olds that's going to be year-round all day. That's amazing for working parents. He got elected on this platform that he was going to be a New York mayor for New York. He was just going to focus on New York stuff, and he was going to fix the little things that bug people. And he's been this amazing demonstration of how much is possible, how much a politician, an elected leader actually can do if all they care about is truly representing the will of their constituents and attending to the little matters that are most on people's minds. So I think he actually represents this. He makes visible that chasm that we often see between what our representatives do and what people actually want.
I mean, it is a tragedy that he comes as such a shock to so many in America, because what he's doing is considered quite normal in many other parts of the world, mm-hmm. and in functioning democracies. And, it's a bit like universal health care and free higher education and various things that seem so far from being achievable in the US that operate and work quite well in other nations. And I suppose that's part of the problem of a kind of isolationist mentality, and the fact that because of the scale of the US and the geography of the US, is that it is hard for people to get a sense of perspective for the greater planet. And maybe we need to do a better job of educating people about other systems, not just of social democracy function, but also of governance and of how modern democracies function. with the press, and because, we don't have any pushback currently against Donald Trump and his insane press conferences. Who are you with? Who are you with? That's all we're getting at the moment. And it's very painful because the democracy is being eroded at multiple levels. It's not just in the judiciary, or it's not just in, Trump's insane cabinet and in various kind of domestic ways. There is an overarching effect that erodes democracy over time, and the world is watching.
Indeed. I mean, I think it's really evident in the fact that, we've had, as I mentioned, some of the most unhinged statements to ever come out of any American president, perhaps any world leader this week. Dropping the F-bomb on Easter, like just down to the lack of...
And saying praise be to Allah in the same sentence.
But sarcastically. I mean, insane. And we're in this moment where the mechanism we have to remove a mad king is a mechanism that we've only ever used when, the president is having bunion surgery, and we are sliding towards more and more shocking and grandiose demonstrations of the unfitness of a president, wondering where the line is, or if there even is a line. I mean, if the president got up to a podium and literally out of his mouth came pure gibberish, word soup, word salad, whatever it is, word meal, do we have a cabinet? Do we have a cabinet that would do anything about it? Do we have a legislature that would do anything about it? It increasingly feels like, no, we don't. We have a government that does not care for the nation. They care for an idolized individual. And it is a profoundly terrifying thing.
I feel we may have past that point regarding the gibberish. We have to take a quick break, but we're going to come back and talk about who is calling it out, not least the Pope. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I've been trying to take my sleep more seriously lately, and honestly, the biggest change I made wasn't a routine or some sleep hack. It was upgrading my mattress. I switched to a Lisa mattress, and I didn't realize how much my old one was messing up my sleep until I replaced it. I used to wake up in pain, not fully rested. You know that feeling where you technically slept, but you're still tired? Well, that's gone now. From night one, it just felt different. The support, the comfort, it actually feels like my whole body can relax. What I like too is that Lisa has different mattresses depending on how you sleep, so you're not just guessing. You can take their quick sleep quiz and get matched in 2 minutes, which made the whole process way easier. And it's not just comfort, they're designed and assembled right here in the US with premium materials, and they give you a 120-night sleep trial. So you really get time to make sure that it's right for you. Also, I love that they give back. Lisa has donated tens of thousands of mattresses to families in need, which just makes supporting them feel even better. If your sleep hasn't been great, this is one of those upgrades that actually makes a difference. Go to lisa.com for 20% off select mattresses, plus an extra $50 off with promo code WEEKEND, exclusive for our listeners. That's LEESA.com, promo code WEEKEND for 20% off select mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Support our show and let them know that we sent you after checkout. We're back on The Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. Benjamin Netanyahu has said, I wish to inform you, there is no ceasefire in Lebanon. He posted this on X. He said Israel was continuing to strike Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we restore your security. Well, those comments came shortly after Donald Trump said he'd asked Netanyahu to be more low-key in Lebanon as the US seeks to negotiate with Iran to bring the war to an end. A voice that we weren't necessarily expecting to hear from in this moment was the Pope. And out of the Vatican, Pope Leo delivered his State of the World speech. And as a result of it, the Pentagon has kind of issued a warning. Emily, firstly, we have an American Pope in the Vatican, which is certainly an unusual kind of curveball. And I thought that might curb any of this type of criticism going the other way. But apparently not. Do you think it's right for the Pope to be making these statements? And does he have a point?
Yeah, he's a global moral leader. He can say, don't kill people. He can say Jesus doesn't listen to the prayers of people who wage war. All of this seems completely in keeping with Jesus as portrayed in the Bible and with Catholic teachings and the perspective of a religion of peace. Yeah, the Pope is in his zone. The problem is that our nation is trying to shove the Pope out of his zone and silence a voice, a moral voice speaking out in favor of global peace. I mean, literally, if your perspective as a nation is that it makes you really, really uncomfortable when another global leader says, hey, maybe we shouldn't do atrocities, I think there's time for a little introspection there. Additionally, I think my favorite rumor that came out of this Pope being American this week is, in the midst of the Pope making public statements, increasingly urgent, clear, unequivocal statements against this conflict, he also met with David Axelrod for an hour, who, as you recall, is very close to President Obama. And there were rumors that perhaps President Obama may meet with the Pope before President Trump meets with this Pope. But my favorite rumor that came out of this is that some fabulous person on the internet saw that David Axelrod was meeting with the Pope and immediately posted, he's running, which reminded me that in fact, the Pope's from Chicago, even though he's voted in some Republican primaries in the past. Right. You never know.
Well, maybe that was an April Fool's. It was Pete Hegseth specifically who was particularly aggrieved by the portions of Leo's speech on the 9th of on the 9th of January, in which the Pope argued that a diplomacy that promotes dialogue and seeks consensus among all parties is being replaced by a diplomacy based on force, and that war is back in vogue and a zeal for war is spreading. And so Hegseth denies that at the same time as renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War.
It's very hard for Hegseth to take the position that he's not extremely enthusiastic about war. He has an unnatural enthusiasm, in fact, for things that most people consider to be horrible. Let me be clear. Nobody's supposed to like the idea of war. That's not a thing any one of us is supposed to want or get behind or crave or long for. It is, in fact, morally abhorrent and horrifying to see somebody in a position of leadership hold an enthusiasm for war itself, not for protecting the powerless, not for defending our nation, not for engaging only in just actions in order to protect national safety, but for war itself, so much so that he renamed his department. So, I think right now it's so strange to me that our administration is engaging at all in moral discourse, because they have no moral leg to stand on. It's one thing to say, we, for reasons that have everything to do with our political alliances and perhaps our insider trading, because as you've noticed, somebody seems to keep knowing exactly what the moves are going to be and making stock market bets that pay off to the tune of millions. Yes. So for whatever reasons, they are engaging in mass acts of extreme violence. It's so strange to me that they also want to have a discourse wherein they come out as morally correct, especially because, as we pointed out in the last conversation, in all other ways, they are so overt about their position and their belief and what they embrace, which tends to be profit for billionaires, destruction of the publicly held goods, undermining of ordinary people in favor of the very wealthy and foreign interests. In this way,
just as Jesus would have wanted.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, why do they want to wade into a conversation with the Pope on what is Christ-like, or what is moral, or what our faith calls us to do or not do? It is so to the point where they're even threatening the Pope, bringing up The Avignon papacy, in which French kings so violently threatened the Pope that the Pope was forced to move the Vatican to France for this period of sort of like weird, violent control by the French government. Why? What do they gain? I mean, they're so comfortable alienating Catholics. I believe, and I want to make sure I'm correct on this, but I believe I saw a news item indicating that the Pentagon only held Protestant services for Easter. Now, it's weird to me that any government agency is holding any religious services of any kind. But in general, this administration has not portrayed itself as a Catholic one. I know that J.D. Vance is overt about his conversion to Catholicism, but like the Pope has been clear
from atheism. We should remind people.
I do not understand why our government wants to be seen both as vicious and Catholically acceptable.
It seems pretty obvious that Donald Trump has been briefed to talk about God more often in his interactions with the media. Pete Hegseth is clearly doing it. On Monday, the day before the tenuous ceasefire was announced, Trump not only insisted that God supports U.S. actions in Iran, he said he was in a position to convey God's wishes to the public. And at the same time, Pete Hegseth explicitly likened the rescue of the missing American airmen shot down over Iran to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is, unprecedented use of God and Jesus in press conferences in places that it's never been heard before. We've heard similar from Caroline Leavitt in the press room too. So this is clearly a concerted effort behind the scenes from the extreme Christian nationalists. And to be clear, we're not talking about moderate Christianity with any of this. We're talking about an extreme form that severs that separation of church and state.
Yes and no. So the perspective of Christian nationalism, as you say, has a lot of sort of oppressive merging of religiosity and government, which is, of course, completely unconstitutional. But a lot of that perspective can also tend to be isolationist and nativist. I mean, I say this with as much neutrality as I can. Foreign interventions and diving into foreign conflicts at the behest of other nations. And, none of that strikes me as even in keeping with what Christian nationalist voters want. That's why it's,
But isn't Israel that kind of Holy Land Armageddon storyline?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're doing it for Israel rather than for the people of Israel or for Netanyahu.
Yes. But I don't think that there's unanimity. Like, I think that certainly there are people who believe in an end times, theology, yes, which places the sort of bloodshed in the Middle East as a necessary prerequisite for the return, for the second coming. But that is a very, very small contingent of Christian voters. And even among Christian nationalist voters, there are also many of them who do not want to see current foreign involvement in ways that they have identified correctly as being as contravening our national interests and the interest of an isolationist perspective, which focuses on the sort of America first idea.
And we've seen that in the polling. We've seen that.
Yeah, the polling is a mess. The president, I cannot imagine that his team is showing him the poll. Like, I don't think they tell him any bad news. It's my theory. I mean, Megyn Kelly. I have never in my life, I don't think, agreed with Megyn Kelly. Yet I completely agreed with everything she said when she went on the air and pointed out how absolutely offensive it was to have a foreign leader sitting co-equal with our president in the Situation Room. Mm. So when you get to the point where like me and like Mehdi Hasan and Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson and like we're all in agreement, like, it's not good for the president or for his understanding of where people are morally or politically.
But what you just described is a form of equal representation that doesn't really exist, because it's very clear that the representatives do not represent the people. Yeah. In terms of the views and national polling time and time again, whether it's over a woman's right to choose or marijuana or any of the kind of hot button issues, invariably the country is in a different place to where these MAGA Republicans are in leadership.
Yeah, I mean, but look at it this way. It's a little bit like a tugboat effect, right? The people are the tugboat and we're dragging our leaders behind us. So I will speak about it on the Democratic side since, I feel a little bit more able to speak from an insider perspective, that, 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, it was enormously challenging for a Democratic politician to say things that were critical of the Israeli government, and specifically of conflicts in which the Israeli government engages and the manner in which they engage in global conflict. We are now in a political moment where it is completely normal and commonplace to see those same lawmakers becoming openly critical. Now, we're in this, I mentioned earlier that even though a majority of Democrats would like their leaders to disavow AIPAC, the leaders still hesitate to do so. It's the tugboat. We're dragging them in a direction. So I'm not saying that the perspective of the people has no impact on the perspective of lawmakers. I'm saying that at any given time, we are not fully represented because it takes the lawmakers so long to catch up with the actual changing mores of their community and the changing desires of their voting public. Now, this is why people say to call your congressperson, because they catch up faster when we're real noisy. And so the louder people get and the more obvious public opinion is in any given direction, particularly when it's changing quickly, the faster we can get some lawmakers, not the Fettermans of the world, but the Cory Bookers, to shift gears. Is that true on the conservative side? I'm waiting to find out. I'm so interested in this new chapter for Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm so
brokering a deal with Ro Khanna and being that kind of go-between.
But Ro Khanna deserves an incredible amount of praise, I should say, for his ability to build alliances in times of incredible political division. His ability to build cross-party alliances is phenomenal, and he deserves all the praise.
We should just mention before we go to another quick break that the No Kings rally, the third one, just gone, was an example of what you're describing, this mobilization of people making their voice heard. It was massive. Some count 10 million people across the country coming out to protest. No kings, no king of corruption, certainly. Republicans don't really protest in the same way. There might be small protests outside abortion clinics, but there isn't really that kind of movement for protest. And we've seen that invariably MAGA Republicans will just be silent and just say, well, whatever Trump says is fine by me.
No, I mean, they do engage. Look at the Moms for Liberty movement, where you had, community members who felt very enthusiastic about banning books, storming school board meetings and becoming very vocal in that direction and, spurring all kinds of phobias that our children could be mentally captured by a novel and fundamentally transformed. I actually think perhaps I have been captured and transformed by a couple of novels, but not in the way Moms for Liberty is.
Isn't that off the back of brainwashing from Donald Trump? Whereas what it's not Democrats that
already predated Trump. I mean, Moms for the book banning movement.
Okay, well, they
show up. They can be vocal.
The conservative movement then, but the difference, I guess, with No Kings is that it's not Democratic leadership that told people to go out and stand up against a tyrant in this way.
Yeah, I agree that there is a grassroots effect that is very different. For example, I remember on January 6th, the allegations of busing in, busloads of individuals who would then be caught up in something that turned out to be wildly illegal. I don't recall a similar incident of Democratic leadership like busing. And of course, there's allegations on the conservative side that all of these protests are fake, that everybody's actors, that the CIA is involved. Like there's always very sort of paranoid allegations of that kind. I have seen, Craigslist ads for protest actors, but they've never been on the progressive side. And I have to say, as a former actor, I've never auditioned to be a protester. I never saw a paid job of that kind. I'm kind of bummed about it.
Well, yes, adverts asking black Americans to sit behind Donald Trump at a rally, I guess, is what you've seen.
Unless he says he doesn't want to sit next to any black military leadership.
There is that too. We could talk about that for hours. Let's take another quick break. I want to come back, though, and talk about Epstein, but more importantly, in this moment, Melania Trump's denial of any knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein and any relationship there. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Owning a home is amazing until it's not. Like, 1 minute you're relaxing with your coffee, the next you're Googling, why is there water coming through my ceiling, and trying not to panic. Repairs never happen at a good time, and they definitely don't care about your budget. And here's the thing, you probably have insurance for your health, your car, maybe even your phone, but a lot of everyday stuff that breaks in your house, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, that's usually not covered. That's where HomeServe comes in. They offer repair plans for exactly those kinds of home systems, basically like having a subscription for your home. Plans start at just $4.99 a month, which is honestly nothing compared to what a surprise repair can cost. I've had one of those oh no moments before, like when a water heater starts acting up out of nowhere and you realize just how expensive it can get fast. Fortunately, I had HomeServe. Knowing you've got a 24/7 hotline to call instead of scrambling to find help, that is the peace of mind that I prefer. It's super simple. You pick a plan that fits your needs and budget, and if something covered breaks, you call and they handle getting a local, reliable professional out to help. They've been doing it for over 20 years with millions of customers and a huge network of local contractors, so they really know what they're doing. So yeah, help protect your home systems and your wallet. Go to homeserve.com to find the plan that's right for you. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range from $4.99 to $11.99 a month for your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs. When I first started my podcast, I'm not going to lie, it felt like I suddenly had 10 jobs. I was figuring out scripts, recording, editing, branding, even little things like logos and posting schedules. And every day there was something new to learn. It got overwhelming fast. Starting anything on your own can feel kind of lonely too, like you're making every decision without a safety net. That's why having the right tools makes such a difference. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and even powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Whether you're just getting started or already growing, it's like having a built-in business partner. You can create a beautiful online store with hundreds of ready-to-use templates, so your brand actually looks like how you want it to. And Shopify's AI tools can help write product descriptions, headlines, and improve your product photos, so you're not stuck doing everything from scratch. Plus, it helps to get the word out. You can easily run email and social media campaigns so you're reaching customers wherever they are. And the best part, you can manage everything in one place. Inventory, payments, analytics, it's all there, which just makes life way easier. And if you ever get stuck, they've got 24/7 customer support, so you're never really doing it alone. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing... Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. That's shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. The First Lady, Melania Trump, has told reporters on Thursday that she never had a relationship with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. It was a televised statement. It was unclear which specific accusations she was responding to exactly, but she basically told the press and the public that she'd never been friends with Epstein. I'm not Epstein's victim. Epstein didn't introduce me to Donald Trump, and photos that you might have seen of us together are most likely fake. This was a very unusual thing to happen in this way. Melania doesn't make speeches that often, and this was clearly something she wanted to disassociate herself from. Are we buying it, though?
I will say, since the last time I heard from her, she was telling me that my child would be educated by robots instead of humans. I much prefer to talk about Epstein with her. This is a much better topic. But from a criminal defense attorney perspective, I have to say, the circumstances under which you put somebody out there to make a disavowing statement about a topic that doesn't even seem to have really arisen yet in the news are extremely limited. Generally, you only do that if you are heading off something really astonishing that is about to come out, and you want to have gotten out ahead of it, as they say. On the other hand, all of the other news is so bad for this administration that, we talked a lot about the administration doing things to distract from Epstein. In fact, when he first went into Iran, people were saying, just like he said Obama would do all those years ago, he's going into Iran to distract from a personal scandal. But now you have to start to wonder, is he going to use Epstein to distract from Iran? Because Iran has gotten so much worse for him. I don't know. I don't know if this is a tactic, if this is a very strangely timed distraction mechanism, or if there is something coming out that will be attention getting, or if the administration thinks there's a 50-50 chance something will come out, and just in case they're getting ahead of it, and if it doesn't come out, this will seem like a nothing burger. It's really, really puzzling. It also strikes me as just incredibly unlikely, given all of her husband's history of friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, that she actually had there were like echoes of Bill Clinton.
I did not have sex with that woman. But what's different, I guess, here, as you say, is that the timing is unusual because Epstein had been overshadowed by the war. But there is also a lot of evidence of Iran hacking into US systems and actually leaking things themselves. And there's obviously a bunch of conspiracies associated with this, but this is the kind of quite smart tactic of the Iranians. They know they can't necessarily win the war with bombs militarily, but they can by closing the Strait of Hormuz and certainly hacking and then dropping boatloads of intel that can screw up Donald Trump and his re-election campaign.
Well, he doesn't have a re-election campaign because
he doesn't. In his mind, he does.
He thinks he does. That one, I feel very, very confident. Actually,
I'm pleased.
People, I think, I'm troubled when people overestimate what he's capable of. So, for example, whenever I get the response like he can do anything he wants, he doesn't care about the law. Well, actually, no. The reason that a lot of people think that is because the media tends to report on weird, bad stuff coming out of the administration. And if there's legal action, any initial injunction or lack of initial injunction. But the media story rarely stays live long enough to show most people that Donald Trump loses in the district courts and courts of appeal about 75% of the time. Not all of those cases can get taken up by the Supreme Court. So the response of, the court will just undo it. No, actually, he loses a lot. And you know what? I haven't seen the administration overtly violate a ruling yet. They have been sneaky and they've tried all kinds of little workarounds, but I have not yet seen direct, blatant fascistic defiance of an actual court ruling. So I think that we need to be accurate about what the risks are. This administration has done so much damage without the kind of blatant violations that people, I think, get distracted by. But back to the statement by Melania, I would be fascinated to see what happens next in terms of this dynamic wherein we are claiming to be negotiating with a nation that says it is not negotiating with us, that is releasing increasingly catchy Lego propaganda videos. Yes. I could absolutely see them going towards an informational form of warfare rather than something militaristic.
Melania also said that the victims deserve their day in the kind of court of public opinion, and that there should be hearings, and that people need to hear their stories and then they can decide for themselves. She didn't go anywhere near defending her husband regarding his interactions with Jeffrey Epstein. She just tried to ring fence herself from that. She just said they'd, met at a couple of parties, New York and Palm Beach, and that's just the social circles that they operated in. But Donald Trump is mentioned in the Epstein files more times than any other male. And there is a good chance that here Melania is basically saying to these victims, okay, take the stand and pin it on my husband.
I don't think that she's saying that. I think she's saying, so there's this Italian saying that I love, which starts, io non c'ero, meaning I wasn't there. And it's a very long saying, and it goes on to say, I wasn't there. But if I was there, I was asleep. And if I was asleep in another part of the house. And if I was asleep in another part of the house, I was sleeping with my face to the wall. Like, I think that it's more of that. It's the io non c'ero. I wasn't there. I don't know. Whatever happens with this guy, not my problem. That being said, I don't know how much independent agency she has to script her own communicative strategy separate from the president. So I would be reluctant to make an assumption that she's taking, perhaps if they foresee some sort of, desire to protect the reputation of Baron Trump. I don't know. I'm trying to imagine, like, for the president, how is it useful to shield his wife from something?
Well, there was a clue in her language. She did refer to Ghislaine Maxwell as the accomplice. Well, Donald Trump, when asked recently, has said that he might consider pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not something I'm thinking about, but maybe I will think about it. And remember, he wished her well when she had her trial. So, there is a little...
Those are silencing statements. So what I will say is, looking at someone who is eligible for a presidential pardon, but who has essentially no other way out of prison, those statements cost the president almost nothing. And they keep hope alive in an individual who may not reveal the full extent of what she knows, as long as she thinks that there's the possibility of a pardon on the table. So I would say that from a strategic perspective, Trump's going to make all kinds of statements, letting her think that he thinks of her lightly, that he thinks of her not in a condemning mindset, that her avenue to relief is not foreclosed, because that may be the only thing preventing disclosures which could be disadvantageous.
Finally, let's just quickly talk about Trump's other remarks about NATO and his hatred for NATO because they're not there for him. And he never kind of separates him from the United States, does he? It's like he is America, as I see it. Mark Rutte came to visit the White House for a closed-door meeting with Trump on Wednesday, and kind of came out afterwards and said, I can understand that Trump was a little unhappy, and he did his best job at diplomacy. But, this is a massive deal, isn't it? The idea that America, which really is the backbone of NATO, could, because of this war, which Trump started effectively, then complains that NATO doesn't come to his aid, and they're like, it's not our war, you started it. And he's effectively asking them to take them back, or take America back to the starting point of this war before he caused any of the trouble. Is this just an exercise in trying to placate a completely insane president of the United States, and that Mark Rutte has been dispatched just to try and patch things up? Or do you think there is a genuine fear that the transatlantic alliance could start to become diluted over this war?
Yeah, there's absolutely a genuine fear. I mean, our president has done a lot of things that were unexpected. Pulling out of NATO would be an unexpected thing he could do. I think that what we're seeing is a divergence between a president who views NATO's obligations as ironclad and contractual versus an actual diplomatic situation in which we don't have partner nations that are subject to some kind of ironclad contractual obligation. We have nations who stand with us in an agreement to protect us from certain forms of peril. And that's why these pre-conflict conversations with allies are important, is because you can figure out how your allies view the conflict you are planning to enter into, whether they see their diplomatic obligations, their treaty obligations as being activated, or whether they don't. And so, it's not like our failure to speak to our allies prior to engaging in conflict was just like some rude little faux pas. It was a massive diplomatic blunder that resulted in a meaningful strategic disadvantage to the United States. This is what happens, by the way, when you don't have a lot of career diplomats doing diplomat things. You have political appointees who do not have a lifetime of experience doing a thing. I mean, it's so odd how we treat governmental work as if it's somehow different than other forms of work. I don't want a political appointee removing my appendix. I want a career surgeon because it is a field of expertise. I want the State Department to have career people who know how to engage in international diplomacy. When we don't have that, you have clown stuff, and we get into messes like we're in now, where I don't think NATO wants to lose the United States, but they cannot necessarily dedicate their resources to engaging in a conflict in which our own president was threatening war crimes this week. How can NATO legitimately step into something like that? It's a terrible situation that is an entirely self-inflicted wound.
It's almost as if, for all of the tragedy surrounding this war, and of course, there are potentially thousands of civilians that have been killed or injured that haven't even been counted yet, that are the collateral damage from this conflict. But it's almost as if something as drastic as this was necessary to make the world community, and I'm talking about European leaders, wake up and realize that Donald Trump is not the full ticket, and that actually you can't placate him, send the king on a state visit, bring him a gift, and think that that's going to be okay because Trump doesn't operate like ordinary humans. He is inhuman in so many ways. And maybe, the annihilation language, the abuse of human rights and international law is really that final nail in the coffin for that relationship.
We're going to find out.
Only time will tell.
Indeed.
Understood. Okay. I'm so grateful to you, as always. For now, Emily Galvin Almanza, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News, or on my Substack, The Anthony Davis. You can also join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.